In the shadowed halls of Styles Court, 1916, a wealthy matriarch, Emily Inglethorp, is poisoned in her locked bedroom, her death a chilling puzzle of betrayal and greed. Enter Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective whose razor-sharp mind unravels a web of lies-burned letters, a hidden vial of strychnine, a faltering alibi. A suspicion falls on her cunning husband Alfred and a mysterious scarred accomplice. Secrets unravel, revealing a household torn by motive. Can Poirot's little grey cells expose the killer before the truth slips away? Dive into a deadly game where trust is a trap and murder lurks in every shadow. Chapter 1. The Arrival at Styles. The summer of 1916 found me. Arthur Hastings, a weary soldier, returned from the mud and clamour of the front, my body patched but my nerves frayed. A bullet wound had earned me a spell of leave, and I was adrift, craving the solace of England's green heart. Thus, when John Cavendish, a friend from my youth, extended an invitation to convalesce at Styles Court, his family's estate in the quiet Essex countryside, I accepted with a gratitude bordering on desperation. The promise of peace, of long walks and familiar faces, was a balm to my battered spirit. Styles Court stood at the end of a winding lane, a stately Elizabethan manor of red brick and mullioned windows, its gables softened by centuries of ivy. The gardens, fragrant with lavender and clipped yew, stretched toward a distant wood, and the air carried a stillness that seemed to mock the chaos I had left behind. John met me at the station in a dog-cart, his broad face breaking into a grin as he clasped my hand. "Good old Hastings," he said, his voice warm but tinged with a fatigue I couldn't place. "You're a sight for sore eyes." The drive to Styles was a study in contrasts. The golden fields and hedgerows glowed under the July sun, yet John's conversation hinted at unease. His mother, Emily Inglethorp, a widow of formidable energy, had recently married Alfred Inglethorp, a man of dubious reputation and 20 years her junior. "A bounder, if you ask me," John muttered, flicking the reins. "But mother's besotted, and she's not one to be crossed." I nodded, sensing a story beneath his words, but the beauty of the countryside lulled me into silence. At the house, I was ushered into a hall panelled in dark oak, its walls hung with portraits of stern-faced Cavendish ancestors. Emily Inglethorp greeted me with a vigour that belied her 60-odd years. She was a tall woman, her silver hair swept into a severe bun, her eyes sharp and appraising. "Captain Hastings," she said, her handshake firm, "we are delighted to have you. War is a dreadful business, but Styles will restore you." Her warmth was genuine, yet there was a commanding air about her, as if she were a general marshalling. Her troops, the household, was a curious mix. John's wife, Mary, was a striking woman with dark, intelligent eyes and a reserved manner that bordered on aloofness. She welcomed me politely, but seemed distracted, her gaze drifting to the window, as if seeking escape. Lawrence, John's younger brother, was a lanky, dreamy sort, his nose buried in a volume of poetry. His responses to my pleasantries vague but kind. Cynthia Murdoch, a ward of sorts to Emily, was a breath of fresh air, a lively girl with auburn curls and a quick laugh, employed at the village dispensary. "I mix potions to cure all ills," she teased, her eyes sparkling. Lastly, there was Evie Howard, Emily's companion, a stout woman with a blunt tongue and a fierce loyalty to her mistress. Her greeting was curt, her stare assessing, as if I were a potential threat to the household's order. Dinner that evening was served in a dining room aglow with candlelight. the table laden with crystal and silver. Emily presided with regal ease, steering the conversation toward her charitable endeavors: hospital funds, war relief, the welfare of Belgian refugees. Alfred Inglethorp, seated at her side, was a study in contrasts, slight, with a neatly waxed mustache and a manner so deferential it verged on. His dark suit was impeccable, his speech laced with platitudes about Emily's generosity. "My dear," he murmured, patting her hand, "your heart is as boundless as your wisdom." I found his fawning faintly repellent, and a glance at Mary confirmed I was not alone. Her lips tightened, and she turned her attention to her soup. The talk turned to the war, and I shared a sanitized account of my time at the front, mindful of the ladies present. John listened intently, but his eyes flicked toward Alfred, who offered bland sympathies that rang hollow. Lawrence, roused from his reverie, spoke of the poetry of Rupert Brooke, his voice soft but fervent, while Cynthia chimed in with tales of her work at the dispensary, her anecdotes laced with humor. Evie, silent for much of the meal, watched Alfred with a hawk-like intensity, her fork pausing mid-air as he praised Emily's latest donation to the village church. As the evening wore on, I sensed undercurrents beneath the polished surface. John's laughter was a shade too hearty, Mary's silences too pointed. Emily, for all her graciousness, seemed to hold the room in a delicate balance, her authority unchallenged yet subtly strained. Alfred's presence was like a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious melody, and I wondered what tensions simmered in the private corners of Styles Court. After coffee in the drawing room, where Emily recounted a recent village fete with infectious enthusiasm, I excused myself, pleading fatigue. My room, a spacious chamber overlooking the rose garden, was a haven of chintz and polished mahogany. As I sank into the feather bed, the quiet of the countryside enveloped me, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. The war felt a world away, and Styles, for all its hidden frictions, promised rest. Yet, as sleep claimed me, a faint unease lingered, premonition, perhaps, of the darkness that would soon descend upon this tranquil house. Chapter 2. A shadow of suspicion, the morning after my arrival at Styles Court. I awoke to the gentle trill of birdsong and the golden light filtering through the chintz curtains. My sleep had been deep, restorative, and for a fleeting moment, the war seemed a distant nightmare. I dressed with care, choosing a light tweed suit suitable for the country, and descended to the breakfast room, where the aroma of kedgeree and fresh coffee greeted me. The household was already assembled, save for Emily Inglethorp, whose absence was noted with a murmur of concern. John Cavendish, seated at the head of the table, was buttering toast with a preoccupied air. "Mother had a poor night," he explained, catching my inquiring glance. "Nothing serious indigestion, Dr. Wilkins says, but she's keeping to her room this morning." Mary, elegant in a pale blue morning dress, sipped her coffee in silence, her expression unreadable. Lawrence, as usual, was lost in a book, his plate of eggs untouched, while Cynthia Murdoch, bright-eyed despite the early hour, chatted about a new remedy she was compounding at the dispensary. Evie Howard, however, was the most animated, her broad face flushed with indignation as she spooned marmalade onto her plate with unnecessary force. Indigestion. "My foot," Evie muttered, her voice low but carrying. "I've told her time and again to watch what she takes. That medicine of hers, it's not right, mark my words." Her eyes, sharp and accusing, flicked toward the door, as if expecting Alfred Inglethorp to appear. John frowned, his knife pausing mid-spread. "Evie, that's enough," he said sharply. "Mother's been taking that tonic for months, and Dr. Wilkins prescribed it himself." Evie snorted, undeterred. "Doctors can be fooled, same as anyone. I know what I know." I found Evie's vehemence unsettling, though her bluntness was oddly refreshing in the polished atmosphere of Styles. Cynthia, perhaps sensing the tension, changed the subject, asking me about my plans for the day. I mentioned a walk to the village, eager to stretch my legs and explore the countryside. "You must visit the church," she said, her smile infectious. "It's Norman, with the most charming stained glass." Mary, rousing herself, offered to lend me a guidebook, her tone courteous but distant. Lawrence merely nodded, his attention still fixed on his book, a volume of Keats. I noted. After breakfast, I lingered in the hall, studying the portraits that lined the walls. The Cavendish forebears gazed down with sombre dignity, their eyes seeming to follow me as I moved. I was pondering the weight of such a legacy when Evie bustled past, her arms laden with linens. "Captain Hastings," she said, pausing, "you're a man of the world. You've seen things. Keep an eye on that Alfred, will you? He's no good, whatever Mrs. Inglethorp thinks." Before I could respond, she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Her words, though melodramatic, planted a seed of unease. Alfred had been absent at breakfast, a fact I hadn't remarked until now. His obsequious demeanour the previous evening had grated, but was there more to Evie's suspicions? I resolved to observe him closely, though I chided myself for indulging in what might be mere gossip. Still, the household's undercurrents were undeniable, and I felt a stir of curiosity, a relic, perhaps, of my days assisting Hercule Poirot in his investigations. The village of Styles St. Mary was a short walk from the estate, its cobbled streets and thatched cottages a picture of pastoral charm. The war had touched it lightly. A few recruitment posters adorned the post office, and the blacksmith's son, I learned, was at the front. But life here moved at a gentler pace. I wandered into the church, as Cynthia had suggested, and found it cool and dim, the stained glass casting jewel-like patterns on the stone floor. As I admired a medieval effigy, a familiar voice broke my reverie. "Mon ami Hastings, is it not extraordinary, the peace of such a place?" I turned to find Hercule Poirot, his diminutive figure impeccable in a dark suit, his moustache gleaming as if freshly waxed. His green eyes twinkled with delight, and I could not help but grin at the sight of him. Poirot, a Belgian refugee of the war, had settled in the village, his presence a gift of Emily Inglethorpe's charity. We had met years before, when his meticulous mind and flair for the dramatic had left an indelible impression. "Poirot," I exclaimed, shaking his hand, "what brings you here?" "A moment of reflection," he replied, gesturing to the pews. "And you, my friend, you are a guest at Styles Court, Nan?" I nodded, recounting my arrival and the curious dynamics of the household. When I mentioned Emily's indisposition, Poirot's expression sharpened. "Indigestion, you say, and prescribed medicine. Tell me, Hastings, who prepares this medicine?" I admitted I didn't know, but Evie's warning echoed in my mind. Poirot listened, his head tilted like a bird's, his fingers steepled. "Interesting," he murmured, "very interesting. We shall walk together, you and I, and discuss this further." We strolled through the village, Poirot's brisk pace belying his small stature. He questioned me closely about the household, his queries deceptively casual. I described Alfred's fawning, Mary's reserve, Lawrence's dreaminess, and Cynthia's vivacity, but it was Evie's accusation that piqued his interest. Poison, she says. A bold claim, Hastings, but not to be dismissed. The human heart is a labyrinth, and greed is a powerful guide. I laughed, accusing him of seeing mysteries where none existed, but his gaze was steady. Where there is wealth, mon ami, there is motive, and where there is motive, there is danger. Back at Styles, the house was abuzz with activity. Emily had emerged from her room, her colour restored, and was holding court in the drawing room, dictating letters to her solicitor about a new charitable fund. Alfred hovered at her side, his manner as servile as ever, fetching papers and offering murmured agreements. "My dear Emily," he said, adjusting her shawl, "you mustn't overtax yourself after last night." She waved him off, her voice robust. "Nonsense, Alfred. A touch of indigestion won't keep me from my duties." I watched them, mindful of Poirot's words. Alfred's solicitude seemed genuine, yet there was a calculated quality to his movements, as if each gesture were rehearsed. Mary, seated by the window with a novel, glanced up occasionally, her expression one of barely veiled contempt. John, meanwhile, had gone to the estate office to review accounts, a task he undertook with visible reluctance. Money's tight. He had confided over breakfast, his tone bitter. Mother's generous, but Alfred's got her ear, and he's not one for economy. The afternoon passed in a haze of summer warmth. I joined Cynthia for a walk in the gardens, where she pointed out rare roses and regaled me with stories of village life. Her cheerfulness was infectious, but I noticed her hesitate when I mentioned Emily's illness. "It's odd," she said, plucking a petal. "Mrs. Inglethorpe's always been so strong. The tourniquet's just a mild sedative, for her nerves. I check it myself at the dispensary." Her words were reassuring, yet a flicker of doubts crossed her face, gone as quickly as it came. As we returned to the house, a commotion erupted in the hall. Evie Howard, her face thunderous, was confronting Emily, her voice raised to a pitch that carried through the open windows. "I'm telling you, Emily, it's that man. He's after your money, and now your health. You mark my words, the medicine's not safe." Emily, standing firm, her hands clasped before her, responded with icy calm. "Evie, you forget yourself. Alfred is my husband, and I trust him implicitly. This is nonsense." Evie, undaunted, threw up her hands. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. I'm done here, I'm leaving, and you can keep your precious Alfred." With that, she stormed upstairs, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. I stood, rooted, the scene unfolding like a play. Alfred, who had appeared at Emily's side, looked suitably aggrieved, his moustache twitching. "My dear, I'm appalled," he said, his voice trembling. "Miss Howard's accusations are baseless." Emily patted his arm, her expression softening. "Pay her no mind, Alfred. She's overwrought." But as they moved to the drawing room, I caught a glimpse of Mary. Lingering in the doorway, her eyes narrowed as she watched Alfred. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I felt the weight of secrets pressing against the walls of Styles Court. Dinner that evening was a subdued affair. Evie's absence was palpable, her chair empty, her departure confirmed by a curt note. Left for Emily, the conversation limped along, Emily steering it toward neutral topics, the weather, the harvest, a forthcoming village bazaar. Alfred was solicitous, carving the roast with precision, but his eyes darted nervously, as if expecting another outburst. John, unusually quiet, drank more wine than was his custom, while Mary's silences were punctuated by sharp, cryptic remarks. "Loyalty is a rare commodity," she said at one point, her gaze fixed on Alfred, who flushed but did not reply. Lawrence, oblivious, murmured about Shelley, his fork tracing patterns in his untouched peas. Cynthia, seated beside me, whispered, "It's like a storm brewing, isn't it?" Poor Mrs. Inglethorp. After dinner, I retired to the library, seeking refuge in a novel. The room, lined with leather-bound volumes, smelled of wax and old paper, a comforting contrast to the day's tensions. I was halfway through a chapter when John appeared, a brandy glass in hand. "Hastings," he said, sinking into an armchair, "you've landed in a hornet's nest, haven't you?" His tone was light, but his eyes were troubled. I pressed him gently, and he leaned forward, his voice low. "It's mother's money, you see. She's got pots of it. Father left her a fortune, and she controls it all. Alfred's set to inherit the lion's share, and it sticks in my craw. Lawrence and I were her sons, but she's blind to him. And now this illness." He trailed off, swirling his brandy. I hesitated, then shared Evie's warning about the medicine. John's jaw tightened. "Evie's a loyal old thing, but she's got a bee in her bonnet about Alfred. Still, it's queer, isn't it? Mother's never been ill like this before." He stood abruptly, draining his glass. "Keep your eyes open, Hastings. Something's not right here." As he left, I sat back, the novel forgotten. Evie's accusations, Poirot's probing. John's unease, they wove a tapestry of suspicion, its threads too tangled to unravel. I thought of Emily, so vital yet vulnerable, and Alfred, whose polished surface hid what I could not yet name. The library clock chimed 10, its notes solemn in the stillness. I rose, extinguishing the lamp, and made my way to bed, the shadow of suspicion trailing me like a spectre. Outside, the moon hung low, casting silver light over the gardens. Styles Court, so serene by day, seemed to hold its breath, its secrets locked within its ancient walls. I slept fitfully that night, my dreams haunted by the echo of Evie's warning and the glint of Poirot's knowing eyes. Little did I know that the storm Cynthia had sensed was closer than any of us imagined, its first gusts already stirring the air of Styles. Chapter 3. The fatal night. The days following Evie Howard's dramatic departure from Styles Court passed in a deceptive calm, like the hush before a tempest. Emily Inglethorp, restored to her vigorous self, resumed her duties with characteristic zeal, overseeing the household and planning a village fundraiser with the fervour of a general. Yet the memory of Evie's accusations lingered, a faint discord beneath the surface of our daily routines. I observed Alfred Inglethorp with renewed scrutiny, noting his ceaseless attentiveness to Emily fetching her shawl, pouring her tea, each act polished to a sheen that felt rehearsed. Mary Cavendish's cool detachment seemed to sharpen in his presence, while John's mood grew increasingly sombre, his thoughts often lost to the estate's financial burdens. Cynthia Murdoch, though cheerful, betrayed moments of unease, her laughter a touch too bright. Only Lawrence, ensconced in his poetry, appeared untouched by the household's tensions. On the third evening after Evie's exit, the 18th of July, 1916, I dined with the family in the candlelit grandeur of the dining room. Emily, resplendent in a violet gown, dominated the conversation, recounting a letter from a Belgian refugee she had aided. "Such gratitude," she said, her eyes alight. "It makes one's efforts worthwhile." Alfred, at her side, nodded with exaggerated solemnity, his mustache twitching. "Your generosity, my dear, is an inspiration," he intoned, earning a fleeting scowl from Mary. John, picking at his pheasant, muttered something about costs, while Cynthia steered the talk to lighter matters, describing a comical mishap at the dispensary. I contributed little, my thoughts drifting to Hercule Poirot, whom I had not seen since our village encounter. His cryptic warnings about motive and danger echoed faintly, though I dismissed them as fanciful. After dinner, we adjourned to the drawing-room for coffee. Emily, sipping from a delicate porcelain cup, mentioned her nightly tonic, a habit she had maintained for months to soothe her nerves. "Dr. Wilkins swears by it," she said, gesturing to a small bottle on the sideboard. "A few drops in water, and I sleep like a child." Alfred rose to prepare it, measuring the dose with meticulous care. I watched, recalling Evie's warning, but saw nothing, amiss only the steady pour of liquid into a glass. Emily drank it down, her expression serene, and soon retired, pleading a slight headache. "A good night's rest will set me right," she assured us, her voice firm. I lingered in the drawing-room, chatting with Cynthia about her work, while Mary played a soft Chopin nocturne at the piano. John and Lawrence had vanished, John to the estate office, Lawrence to his room, no doubt to pen another verse. Alfred, after seeing Emily upstairs, announced he was stepping out to the village to post a letter. "A trifling errand," he said, his smile bland. Mary's fingers faltered on the keys, and she glanced at him sharply, but said nothing. As the front door closed behind him, the atmosphere seemed to lighten, as if a weight had lifted. I retired around 10, my room a haven of quiet after the day's subtle frictions. The moon cast long shadows across the floor, and I stood at the window, gazing at the gardens below. Styles Court, bathed in silver light, appeared almost ethereal, its secrets cloaked in beauty. I was half asleep when a sound shattered the stillness. Shouts, followed by the thud of footsteps in the corridor. My heart leaped, and I threw on a dressing gown, fumbling for the door. The hall was chaos. John, in shirt-sleeves, pounded on Emily's bedroom door, his face pale. "Mother, mother, open the door," he cried. Mary, her hair loose, clutched a shawl, her eyes wide with alarm. Cynthia, in a nightdress, hovered behind, her hands pressed to her mouth. Lawrence appeared dishevelled, his poetry book still in hand. "What's happening?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. "She's terribly ill," John gasped. Dorcas heard her cry out. Dorcas, the housemaid, stood trembling, her apron twisted in her hands. "I was passing, sir, and I heard moans, awful moans," she stammered. The door was locked, and no response came from within. John, with a desperate glance at me, threw his shoulder against it. The wood splintered, and we burst into the room. Emily Inglethorp lay on her four-poster bed, her body racked by convulsions. Her face, contorted in agony, was almost unrecognizable, her lips drawn back in a grimace. Her hands clawed at the bedclothes, and her breaths came in ragged gasps. "My God," I whispered, frozen. Mary pushed past, kneeling beside her. "Emily, can you hear me?" she pleaded. But Emily's eyes, wild and unseeing, stared at the ceiling. Cynthia, sobbing, ran to fetch water, while Lawrence stood rooted, his book falling to the floor. John seized the bedside telephone, shouting for Dr. Wilkins. I scanned the room, my mind racing. The medicine bottle stood on the nightstand, its stopper loose, a faint sediment visible in the glass beside it. A coffee cup, untouched, rested nearby, its saucer askew. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender and something sharper, acrid. Emily's convulsions slowed, her body arching one final time before she collapsed, her breath ceasing with a terrible finality. Mary let out a choked cry, and John, dropping the receiver, fell to his knees. Dr. Wilkins arrived within the hour, his face grim as he examined Emily. "Heart failure," he pronounced, his tone clipped. "A tragic but natural end, given her age and recent indisposition." I stared, incredulous. Natural. The violence of her death seemed anything but. As the household gathered in stunned silence, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Poirot, his coat hastily buttoned, his moustache impeccable despite the hour. How he had been summoned, I could not fathom, but his presence was a lifeline in the chaos. "Mon ami," he said, grasping my arm, his eyes scanning the room. "What has occurred?" I recounted the night's horror, my voice shaking. Poirot listened, his expression unreadable, then approached the bed. He studied Emily's face, her rigid limbs, the glass and bottle. "Heart failure, you say?" he murmured, addressing Dr. Wilkins. "None, monsieur. This is no natural death. This is murder." The word struck like a thunderclap. Mary gasped, Cynthia stifled a sob, and John's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. Dr. Wilkins bristled, but Poirot's authority was undeniable. He knelt beside the nightstand, inspecting the medicine bottle. With a delicate touch, "A sediment," he noted, holding it to the light. "Perhaps laudanum, or something more sinister. We must analyze this at once." He turned to the coffee cup, sniffing it cautiously, then set it aside, untouched. He observed, curious. Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on the locked window, the heavy curtains, the writing desk in the corner. He questioned Dorcas, who confirmed she had heard Emily's cries around midnight, followed by a low moan. "She was alone, sir," Dorcas said, her voice trembling. "Mr. Alfred was out, and no one else was upstairs." Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping a silent rhythm. "And the key?" he asked, indicating the door. John admitted it had been in the lock, on the inside. When they broke in, the police were summoned, their arrival adding to the night's grim theatre. Inspector Wells, a dour man with a walrus moustache, took charge, but Poirot's quiet confidence overshadowed him. He requested the medicine bottle and glass be sent for analysis and instructed the servants to preserve the room untouched. To the household, he was polite but relentless, probing their movements that evening. John had been in the estate office until 11, Mary in the drawing room with Cynthia until 10:30. Lawrence claimed to have been in his room, writing, though. His vagueness raised Poirot's eyebrow. Cynthia, tearful, said she had retired early, exhausted from her work. Alfred, still absent, was the subject of whispered speculation as dawn broke, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold. Poirot drew me aside. "Hastings," he said, his voice low, "this is a crime of calculation. The locked door, the medicine, the timing all point to a mind both cunning and desperate." I nodded, my thoughts a jumble of grief and suspicion. Emily's death had torn the veil from Styles Court, revealing a web of motives, money, jealousy, betrayal, but whose hand had spun it? The household dispersed, shell-shocked, to their rooms. Poirot remained, pacing the corridor, his eyes alight with that peculiar intensity I knew so well. "We begin, mon ami," he said, clapping my shoulder. "The truth lies hidden, but the little grey cells, They will find it. As I watched him, a chill settled over me. Styles Court, once a haven, was now a battleground, and the fatal night had only marked the opening skirmish. Chapter 4. The Web of Motives. The morning after Emily Inglethorpe's tragic death dawned grey and oppressive. The sky over Styles Court heavy with unshed rain. The household moved through a fog of grief and suspicion, their faces drawn, their voices hushed. The police, under Inspector Wells, had cordoned off Emily's bedroom, and a sombre air clung to the corridors, as if the very walls mourned their mistress. I breakfasted alone, the dining room eerily silent without Emily's commanding presence. John Cavendish, I learned, was with the inspector, while Mary had taken to her room, pleading a headache. Lawrence drifted in briefly, his eyes redrimmed, and Cynthia, though pale, attempted a brave front, stirring her tea with mechanical precision. Hercule Poirot, however, was a whirlwind of quiet energy. He joined me as I finished my coffee, his suit immaculate, his moustache a defiant banner of resolve. "Mon ami," he said, seating himself with a flourish, "we are at the heart of a puzzle, and each piece must be examined with care. Come, let us walk the grounds and consider the motives that weave this web." I agreed, grateful for his clarity amid the chaos, and we stepped into the gardens, where the roses, damp with dew, seemed to droop in sympathy. Poirot's questions were precise, his mind a scalpel slicing through the tangle of events. "Tell me, Hastings," he began, pausing by a clipped yew, "who benefits from Madame Inglethorpe's death?" I hesitated, then ventured the obvious, Alfred Inglethorpe, whose inheritance was rumoured to be substantial. Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "We, the husband. A man of charm, perhaps, but charm can mask ambition. Yet we must not stop there. What of the sons, John and Lawrence? Money is a powerful spur, and resentment festers in the shadow of wealth." I recounted John's bitterness over Emily's fortune, how her will favoured Alfred, leaving her sons with modest allowances. Lawrence, I added, seemed less concerned with money, his passions lying in poetry, but his dreaminess could conceal deeper feelings. Poirot listened, his fingers tracing the edge of his hat. "And Madame Cavendish, her Freudrit intrigues me. An unhappy wife, perhaps, with her own reasons to wish the status quo altered." I protested, finding Mary's reserve more a matter of temperament than malice, but Poirot waved a hand. "Temperament, mon ami, is a mask. We must look beneath." Our walk took us to the edge of the estate, where the woods bordered a meadow. Poirot paused, his gaze distant. "Cynthia Murdoch," he mused. "A young woman of spirit, with access to the dispensary. Could she be persuaded? A fatal error." I bristled at the suggestion, her grief the previous night so raw, but Poirot's expression was unyielding. Grief can be genuine and yet not absolve. We must consider all possibilities. Returning to the house, we learned that the inquest was set for the following day, to be held in the village hall. Inspector Wells, a methodical man, had requested statements from the household, and Poirot, though not officially involved, was granted leave to observe his reputation preceding him. He spent the morning interviewing the servants, his questions deceptively gentle. Dorcas, the housemaid, confirmed Emily's routine, the tonic taken nightly, prepared by Alfred, or occasionally Cynthia, sourced from the dispensary, always. "The same bottle, sir," she said, her hands twisting her apron. Mrs. Inglethorpe was particular about it. Poirot's interest sharpened when Dorcas mentioned a recent change, Alfred had taken to fetching the tonic himself, insisting it spared Cynthia the trouble. Most attentive he was, Dorcas added, her tone neutral but her eyes wary. Poirot thanked her, then turned to me. Attentive, or controlling. The distinction is vital. He next questioned the butler, Manning, who recalled overhearing a heated exchange between Emily and Alfred a week prior, something about papers and changes. Manning, loyal to Emily, had thought little of it, but Poirot's eyes gleamed. Papers, he murmured. A will, perhaps. The afternoon brought Alfred's return from the village, where he claimed to have been delayed by business. His composure was strained, his smile a thin veneer over nervous energy. Inspector Wells questioned him sharply about his whereabouts the previous night, and Alfred produced a receipt from the village post office. Time-stamped at 10:15 p.m. I posted a letter, then lingered to speak with the chemist. He said, his voice smooth. I was back by midnight, but the house was quiet, and I retired. Wells, unimpressed, noted the timing placed him absent during Emily's fatal attack, but Poirot's silence suggested he was unconvinced. The inquest, held in the Stark village hall, was a grim affair. The coroner, a bespectacled man with a reedy voice, called witnesses in turn. Dr. Wilkins testified first, reiterating his initial diagnosis of heart failure but conceding, under pressure, that Emily's symptoms convulsions, facial contortions aligned with strychnine poisoning. The post-mortem, conducted that morning, confirmed traces of the poison in her system, a revelation that sent a murmur through the room. Strychnine, Poirot whispered to me, is a cruel choice. Slow, painful, and deliberate. John testified. Next, his voice steady but his hands clenched. He described breaking into Emily's room, the horror of her final moments. Mary, pale but composed, corroborated his account, her answers clipped. Lawrence, visibly shaken, spoke of retiring early, claiming ignorance of the night's events until roused by the commotion. Cynthia, her eyes swollen from crying, vouched for the dispensary's protocols, insisting the tonic was safe when bottled. I checked it myself, she said, her voice breaking. It was just laudanum, a mild dose. Alfred, the last to testify, maintained his alibi, producing the post office receipt and the chemist's corroboration. The coroner, after deliberation, ruled the death a murder by strychnine poisoning. With no suspect named but suspicion hanging heavily over Alfred, Poirot, observing from the back, was a study in concentration, his notebook filled with cryptic jottings. As we left the hall, he drew me aside. The web, Hastings, is intricate. Alfred is the obvious thread, but others are knotted here: jealousy, resentment, desperation. He outlined his next steps: a thorough search of Emily's room, a closer look at her correspondence, and a discreet inquiry into Alfred's village. Movements, the locked door, he added, is a puzzle. If the key was inside, how did the poisoner escape? Or did they not need to? Back at Styles, Poirot requested access to Emily's room, which Inspector Wells grudgingly permitted. The space, still untouched, was a frozen tableau of tragedy, the bed unmade, the medicine bottle and glass on the nightstand, the coffee cup undisturbed. Poirot moved with methodical grace, examining each item. He lifted the bottle, noting the sediment, and sniffed the glass, his nose wrinkling. Laudanum, yes, but something else, bitter, chemical. The coffee cup, he confirmed, was clean, its contents untouched since dinner. He paused at the writing desk, where a faint burn mark marred the polished surface. curious," he said, running a finger over it. "A document, perhaps destroyed in haste." He opened the desk drawers, revealing neat stacks of letters and household accounts. One letter, from Emily's solicitor, caught his eye, its date recent. "My dear Mrs. Inglethorp," it read, "per your instructions, I am preparing a draft of the revised will, to be finalized at your convenience." Poirot's lips curved. "A new will, Hastings. This changes the landscape. Who knew of this, and who feared it?" We were interrupted by Mary, who entered to retrieve a shawl. Her presence, so poised, seemed to unsettle Poirot, who watched her closely. "Madame," he said, "did Mrs. Inglethorp speak of her intentions regarding her estate?" Mary's eyes flickered, but her voice was cool. "She mentioned charities, as always. Her will was her own affair." Poirot nodded, his politeness masking a deeper scrutiny, and Mary left, her footsteps echoing softly as evening fell. Poirot shared his theory. The strychnine was likely introduced into the tonic over days, a cumulative dose masked by the laudanum's sedative effect. "The poisoner," he said, "is patient, calculating." They knew her habits, her trust in that bottle. Alfred remained the prime suspect, his access to the tonic and motive securing his inheritance undeniable, yet Poirot cautioned against haste. Others had opportunity: Hastings, Cynthia at the dispensary, John or Lawrence in the house. Even Mary, whose coolness hides a fire. We must unravel the motives before we tighten the noose. Dinner was a strained affair. The household gathered under the weight of the inquest's verdict. Alfred, subdued, ate little, his eyes darting to the empty chair at the table's head. John spoke of funeral arrangements, his voice mechanical, while Mary's silences were punctuated by sharp glances at Alfred. Cynthia, struggling for normalcy, asked me about my war experiences, but her hands trembled. Lawrence, as ever, seemed detached. Murmuring about elegies for Emily, I felt Poirot's absence. Keenly he had declined to join us, citing a small matter to investigate, and the meal ended in uneasy silence. Later, in the library, I found Poirot poring over a village map, his finger tracing the route to the post office. "Alfred's alibi," he said, "is too perfect. I have sent a telegram to the chemist, seeking precision on the timing. And this burn mark, it gnaws at me. A letter, a will, a secret destroyed. Tomorrow we search the ashes." I nodded, my mind reeling with the day's revelations. Styles Court, once a refuge, was now a chessboard, its players locked in a deadly game. As I retired, the rain finally broke, its patter a mournful counterpoint to the questions swirling in my mind. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, and I sensed the web of motives tightening, its threads leading inexorably to the truth. Chapter 5. Poirot's little inquiries, the days following the inquest at Styles Court, were cloaked in a tense hush, as if the house itself held its breath. The rain that had begun the previous night persisted, drumming against the windows and casting the rooms in a dreary half-light. Emily Inglethorpe's absence was a wound, felt in the empty chair at breakfast, the silent corridors where her voice once rang. Yet life, however altered, pressed on. The household moved through their routines with mechanical precision, their faces masks of grief or guardedness, while the spectre of murder loomed over us all. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the gloom, was a beacon of purpose. His energy was relentless, his mind a finely tuned instrument probing the crevices of the crime. That morning, As I joined him in the library, a haven of leather-bound tomes and flickering lamplight, he was already at work. A stack of Emily's correspondence spread before him. "Bonjour, Hastings," he greeted, his eyes bright despite. "The hour, today, we pursue the truth through the smallest details. The grand gestures, they mislead, but the little inquiries they reveal." I nodded, accustomed to his cryptic pronouncements, and settled beside him, eager to assist. Poirot's first task was to revisit the servants' accounts, seeking discrepancies overlooked in the initial shock. He summoned Dorcas, the housemaid, whose loyalty to Emily was matched only by her sharp memory. She stood before us, her apron smoothed, her gaze steady. "Tell me, Dorcas," Poirot began, his tone gentle, "of Madame Inglethorpe's habits with her medicine. Who handled it, and when?" Dorcas recounted the routine. Emily took her tonic nightly, a few drops in water, prepared by Alfred Inglethorpe, or, occasionally, Cynthia Murdoch. Recently, Alfred had insisted on fetching the bottle from the dispensary himself, a change Dorcas found odd. "He said it was to save Miss Cynthia the bother," she said, her lips pursing. "But Mrs. Inglethorpe never complained before." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the bottle, did you ever see it left unattended?" Dorcas hesitated, then recalled an instance a week prior, when she found the bottle on the hall table. "Its stopper loose. I thought it careless, sir, and put it back in the drawing-room." Poirot thanked her, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm. "Careless or deliberate?" he murmured as she left. I suggested the bottle might have been tampered with then, but Poirot shook his head. "Possible, Hastings, but strychnine is slow. The fatal dose was likely administered closer to the end, masked by the laudanum sedation." Next, Poirot turned to Emily's correspondence, seeking clues to her intentions. The letter from her solicitor, hinting at a revised will, was a tantalizing thread. We sifted through her desk, finding bills, charitable pledges, and personal notes, but no draft of the new will. One item caught Poirot's eye, a receipt for a charitable donation, signed by Alfred, dated 2 days before Emily's death. "Curious," Poirot said, tapping the paper. "A large sum, authorized by Monsieur Inglethorpe. Did Madame know of this?" I wondered if Alfred was siphoning funds, but Poirot cautioned patience. "Motive, yes, but evidence we need more." Inquiries were interrupted by the arrival of the forensic report, delivered by a constable from Inspector Wells. Poirot read it with intense focus, his lips curving slightly. The medicine bottle contained laudanum, as expected, but laced with strychnine in a concentration sufficient to kill over several doses. The glass beside Emily's bed held traces of both, confirming the poison was ingested that night. "A clever plan," Poirot said, folding the report. The laudanum dulled her senses, delaying the strychnine's effect until it was too late. I marveled at the precision, but Poirot's expression was grim. Clever, but not infallible. The poisoner miscalculated. The timing her convulsions came too soon. We ventured to the village to pursue Alfred's alibi, Poirot's suspicions of its perfection undimmed. At the post office, the clerk, a wiry man with a penchant for gossip, confirmed Alfred's visit at 10:15 p.m. on the fatal night. Posted a letter, he did, and chatted a bit, the clerk said. Seemed in no hurry. The chemist, Mr. Hargreaves, corroborated Alfred's presence around 10:30, discussing a minor ailment. Yet Poirot pressed further, asking if Alfred had lingered elsewhere. Hargreaves frowned, recalling a fleeting glimpse of Alfred near the village green at 11 o'clock. though he could not swear to it. "It was dark, sir," he admitted. Poirot thanked him, his silence heavy with thought. Back at Styles, Poirot's inquiries took a psychological turn. He observed the household at luncheon, where the atmosphere was strained. John, grappling with funeral arrangements, was curt, his eyes shadowed. Mary, elegant but remote, spoke little, her gaze fixed on some inner horizon. Lawrence, as ever, seemed detached, sketching idly on a napkin, while Cynthia's forced cheer faltered, her hands trembling as she passed the salt. Alfred, seated at the table's head, was a study in composure, his manners impeccable yet tinged with unease. Poirot watched him closely, noting how he avoided mention of the inquest's findings. After luncheon, Poirot drew Alfred aside under the guise of discussing Emily's charities. "Monsieur," he said, his tone disarming, "you were devoted to Madame Inglethorp. Did she ever speak of altering her will?" Alfred's mustache twitched, but his voice was steady. "She mentioned charities, naturally, but her will was settled. I had no cause to question it." Poirot nodded, his politeness a mask for scrutiny. "And the medicine you prepared it with care, oui," Alfred affirmed, his eyes flickering. "Always, Monsieur Poirot. I followed Dr. Wilkins' instructions to the letter." Poirot's next target was Cynthia, whom he found in the conservatory, tending a wilting fern. Her auburn curls were dishevelled, her eyes red from unshed tears. "Mademoiselle Poirot," began, his voice soft, "you are skilled at the dispensary. Tell me of the tonic's preparation." Cynthia described the process. Laudanum diluted in a standard solution, bottled under strict protocols. "I checked every batch," she said, her voice quavering. "It was safe, I swear." Poirot pressed gently, asking if anyone Alfred perhaps had requested unusual compounds. Cynthia hesitated, then admitted Alfred had once asked about sedatives, claiming it was for Emily's nerves. "I gave him nothing," she added quickly. "I told him to consult Dr. Wilkins." Poirot's inquiries extended to Lawrence, whom we found in the library, penning verses by lamplight. His dreamy air dissolved under Poirot's gaze. "Monsieur Cavendish," Poirot said, "your mother's death has not altered your plans." Lawrence blinked, his pen stilling. "Plans? I have none, save my writing." Poirot probed his whereabouts on the fatal night, and Lawrence's vagueness claiming to have been about the house drew a raised eyebrow. "Poetry," Poirot remarked later, "is a fine refuge, but it may hide more than it reveals." As evening approached, Poirot shared his evolving theory. "The poisoner," he said, pacing the library, "is within this house. Alfred is the linchpin, his access to the tonic, his motive of inheritance, his questionable alibi. Yet I sense a deeper game, the new will, the burned mark on the desks and one feared exposure." I suggested Mary, her aloofness suspicious, but Poirot demurred. "She is discontented, yes, but her heart is not in this crime. Cynthia, perhaps, was used, her expertise exploited. Lawrence, too, bears. Watching his detachment is too convenient." Dinner was a sombre affair, the household subdued under the weight of suspicion. Alfred's attempts at conversation fell flat, John's responses curt. Mary's silences were punctuated by sharp glances, while Cynthia ate little, her eyes downcast. Lawrence, lost in thought, barely spoke. I felt Poirot's absence he had. Retired to his cottage to reflect, and the meal ended swiftly, each of us retreating to our private burdens. Later, in my room, I pondered Poirot's inquiries. The web of motives was tightening, each thread Alfred's greed, John's resentment, Cynthia's access, Lawrence's secrecy pulling us closer to the truth. Yet the burn mark nagged at me, a clue to a secret destroyed. As the rain ceased, leaving a starlit sky, I sensed Poirot's little grey cells were weaving the strands together, inching toward the revelation that would shatter the shadows of Styles Court. Chapter 6. A clue in the ashes. The persistent drizzle that had shrouded Styles Court gave way, on the 5th day after Emily Inglethorpe's murder, to a fragile sunlight that pierced the morning mist. The house, though steeped in mourning, stirred, with a restless undercurrent, as if the very walls sensed the tightening net of suspicion. Breakfast was a subdued affair, the clink of china and murmured pleasantries barely masking the strain. John Cavendish, grappling with the estate's affairs, was curt, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. Mary, poised as ever, sipped her tea with a detachment that bordered on defiance. Cynthia Murdoch, her usual vivacity dimmed, toyed with her toast, while Lawrence, lost in a volume of Tennyson, seemed oblivious to the tension. Alfred Inglethorpe, notably absent, had left early for the village, a fact that drew a sharp glance from Mary but no comment. Hercule Poirot, joining me in the library after breakfast, was a study in quiet determination. His suit was pristine, his moustache a gleaming testament to his unshakable resolve. "Mon ami," he said, settling into an armchair, "today we chase a phantom clue that eludes us yet holds the key to this crime." He referred to the burn mark on Emily's writing desk, a detail that had haunted him since its discovery. A document was destroyed, Hastings, and in its ashes lies the truth. We must find it. Our first task was to revisit Emily's bedroom, still sealed by Inspector Wells' orders, but accessible with his grudging consent. The room was unchanged, a frozen tableau of tragedy, the unmade bed, the medicine bottle and glass on the nightstand, the coffee cup untouched. Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker, his eyes scanning every surface. He knelt by the fireplace, where a small grate held the remnants of a fire. "Here," he said, sifting through the ashes with a pair of tweezers, "is where the secret was consumed." His fingers, deft and patient, extracted fragments of charred paper, their edges curled like autumn leaves. Most were illegible, but one bore a partial script in Emily's firm hand. "To my solicitor, revised, fair provision." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Voila, Hastings. A letter, or perhaps the draft of a new will, destroyed to conceal its intent." He placed the fragments in an envelope, his movements reverent. "This confirms the solicitor's letter. Madame Inglethorpe planned to alter her estate, likely reducing Monsieur Alfred's share. The question is, who knew? I suggested Alfred, his motive strengthened by the threat of disinheritance. But Poirot cautioned against haste. He is central, but others may have feared this change. John, Lawrence, even Madame Cavendish, whose future rests on the estate's wealth." Leaving the room, Poirot's attention turned to the forensic evidence. The analyst's report, delivered that morning, refined our understanding. The strychnine in Emily's tonic was administered in small doses over at least 3 days, culminating in the lethal dose on the fatal night. The laudanum, a constant in the mixture, had masked the poison's bitterness and delayed its effects, ensuring Emily's symptoms appeared only when rescue was impossible. "A diabolical mind," Poirot said, pacing the library, patient, precise, and intimate with her habits. The poisoner walked these halls, unseen yet ever present. We ventured next to the dispensary in Styles, St. Mary, where Cynthia worked, to probe the tonic's origins. The small, orderly shop smelled of camphor and herbs, its shelves lined with bottles and jars. Cynthia, summoned from her duties, greeted us with a wan smile, her auburn curls tucked under a cap. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice tremulous. "I've gone over it 100 times. The tonic was safe when it left here." Poirot, his tone gentle, questioned her closely about the laudanum's preparation. She described measuring the doses herself, under the chemist's supervision, and sealing the bottles with wax. "No one could tamper with it here," she insisted, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Poirot pressed further, asking about Alfred's visits. Cynthia admitted he had come frequently in recent weeks, ostensibly to collect Emily's tonic. He was polite, always, she said, but once he asked about strychnine, said it was for a scientific curiosity. I told him it was restricted, and he dropped it. Poirot's eyebrow rose, but he said nothing, thanking her with a courtly bow. As we left, he murmured, "Mademoiselle Cynthia is honest, I think, but naive. She may have been a tool, unwitting, in the hands of a master." Back at Styles, Poirot sought out John Cavendish, finding him in the estate office, poring over ledgers. John's face was haggard, his temper frayed by the dual burdens of grief and debt. "Monsieur Poirot," began, "your mother's fortune, was it a source of discord?" John's jaw tightened, but he answered candidly, "Mother controlled. Everything father's legacy, the investments, all of it. Alfred was to get the bulk, which galled me, but she wouldn't hear a word against him. Lately, though, she hinted at changes more for charity, less for him." He paused, his eyes meeting Poirot's. "I didn't know about a new will, if that's what you're driving at." Poirot nodded, then asked about the night of the murder. John reiterated his alibi. He was in the office until 11, then retired. "I heard nothing until Dorcas raised the alarm," he said, his voice flat. Poirot thanked him, but as we left, he confided, "Monsieur John is bitter, but his hands are tied by duty. He is not our poisoner, yet he knows more than he says." Our inquiries took a new turn when Poirot examined the household's routines, focusing on the medicine bottle's journey from dispensary to Emily's bedside. Manning, the butler, revealed a telling detail. Alfred had taken to storing the bottle in his own room, claiming it was safer there. He brought it down each evening, Manning said, his tone neutral. Said it was to keep it from being misplaced. Poirot's lips curved. Misplaced or manipulated. This is no coincidence. The afternoon brought a breakthrough. Poirot, revisiting the fireplace ashes, discovered a second fragment, overlooked in our initial search. It bore a single word in Emily's hand. "Alfred." "Mon Dieu," Poirot exclaimed, holding it to the light. A warning, perhaps, or an accusation. She suspected him, Hastings, and he knew it. The fragment, combined with the solicitor's letter, painted a damning picture. Emily, aware of Alfred's greed, planned to curb his inheritance, and he, in turn, acted to preserve his claim. Poirot's next move was to test Alfred's composure. He arranged a casual encounter in the drawing room, where Alfred was reviewing Emily's charitable correspondence. "Monsieur Poirot," said, his tone conversational, "Madame Inglethorp was a woman of principle. Did she ever discuss her will with you?" Alfred's hand froze, his pen hovering over a page. "She spoke of her charities," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "Her will was her own concern." Poirot pressed, mentioning the burned document. A letter, perhaps, to her solicitor, one that threatened your future. Alfred's mustache twitched, and he rose abruptly. I know nothing of that, he snapped, excusing himself with a curt nod. Poirot watched him go, his eyes alight. He is rattled, Hastings. The ashes have spoken, and he hears their echo. I suggested confronting Alfred outright, but Poirot demurred. Not yet, mon ami. We have the thread, but the knot remains. We must trace every strand Mary silences, Lawrence's detachment, Cynthia's access. The truth is near, but it is fragile. Dinner that evening was a strained ritual. The household gathered under the chandelier's muted glow. John spoke of the funeral, set for the following day, his voice hollow. Mary's elegance masked a simmering tension, her eyes flicking to Alfred, who ate with forced calm. Cynthia, subdued, avoided mention of the dispensary, while Lawrence murmured about elegies, his napkin crumpled in his fist. Poirot, present at John's insistence, observed in silence, his gaze a silent scalpel dissecting each gesture. After dinner, Poirot drew me to the library, where he outlined his theory. The crime, he said, is a tapestry of greed and fear. Alfred poisoned the tonic, yes, but the burned letter suggests he acted to prevent discovery. The new will was his undoing. Emily's suspicion, her intent to disinherit him, drove him to murder. Yet I sense another hand, perhaps unwitting, in the dispensary or the house. I proposed Cynthia, her expertise a potential liability, but Poirot shook his head. She is innocent, I think, but used. Lawrence too bears scrutiny. His vagueness is a shield. As we parted, the house settled into an uneasy quiet, the funeral looming like a dark horizon. The ashes had yielded their clue, but the puzzle was incomplete. Poirot's little inquiries were closing in, each step a tightening of the noose around the killer's neck. I retired, the weight of the day heavy on my shoulders, yet buoyed by the certainty that Poirot's relentless mind would soon unmask the shadow that stalked Styles' court. Chapter 7. The alibi unravels the morning of Emily Inglethorpe's funeral. The 6th day since her murder dawned with a brittle clarity, the sun casting long shadows across the dew-soaked lawns of Styles Court. The house was subdued, its occupants moving through the rituals of mourning with a heaviness that went beyond grief. Suspicion had woven itself into the fabric of daily life, and each glance, each word, seemed laden with unspoken accusations. I dressed in sombre black, my mood as grey as the suit, and joined the household for a breakfast that was more formality than sustenance. John Cavendish, his face etched with strain, spoke sparingly of the service, while Mary, her elegance muted by a widow's veil, maintained her customary reserve. Cynthia Murdoch, her eyes shadowed, pushed her food around her plate, and Lawrence, clutching a slim volume of Donne, was silent, his thoughts elsewhere. Alfred Inglethorpe, impeccable in mourning attire, was solicitous to a fault. His condolences to John met with a curt nod. Hercule Poirot, ever the anomaly in this tableau of sorrow, joined us briefly, his presence a quiet reassurance. His eyes, bright with purpose, betrayed no trace of the fatigue that plagued the rest of us. Mon ami, he whispered as we left the dining room, today we mourn, but we also advance. The alibi of Monsieur Alfredit is a house of cards, and I shall topple it. His confidence, as always, was infectious, and I followed him to the library, where he outlined his plan to probe Alfred's movements on the night of the murder. The funeral, held at the Norman church in Styles St. Mary, was a solemn affair. The village turned out in force, their faces a mix of curiosity and respect, for Emily had been a pillar of the community. The vicar's eulogy praised her charity, her strength, but made no mention of the shadow of murder. As the coffin was lowered into the earth, I watched the household. John's jaw tight, Mary's gaze distant, Cynthia's quiet sobs, Lawrence's abstracted stare, and Alfred's studied grief, his handkerchief pressed to his eyes with theatrical precision. Poirot at my side observed in silence, his notebook discreetly in hand. After the service, while the villagers dispersed, Poirot and I lingered in the churchyard, the scent of yew and damp earth heavy in the air. The alibi, Poirot said. His voice, low, rests on the post office and the chemist. But there is a gap, Hastings, a window of time unaccounted for. We shall exploit it. His plan was simple yet bold, to re-interview the village witnesses, seeking inconsistencies, and to enlist a local Aletha innkeeper's daughter, a sharp-eyed girl known for her memory. We began at the post office, where the clerk, Mr. Perkins, reiterated his account. Alfred had posted a letter at 10:15 p.m., lingering briefly to chat. He seemed cheerful enough, Perkins said, polishing his spectacles. No rush about him. Poirot nodded, then asked about the letter's recipient. Perkins, after a moment's thought, recalled it was addressed to a London firm, though the name escaped him. A business matter, I'd wager, he added. Poirot thanked him, his expression unreadable, but I sensed the detail intrigued him. The chemist, Mr. Hargreaves, was next. His shop, redolent of camphor and lavender, was quiet, and he greeted us with a wary nod. He confirmed Alfred's visit around 10:30, discussing a remedy for sleeplessness. He was there 10 minutes, no more, Hargreaves said, wiping his counter. Poirot pressed gently, asking if Alfred had seemed anxious or hurried. Hargreaves frowned, then admitted he did glance at his watch once. Now you mention it. Said he had to be getting back. Poirot's eyes flickered. And after he left, did you see him again that night? Hargreaves hesitated, then recalled spotting Alfred near the village green around 11 o'clock as he closed up shop. Just a glimpse, mind you, he said. It was dark, and I could have been mistaken. This was the crack Poirot sought. The green was a mere 5 minutes from Styles Court, placing Alfred closer to the house than his alibi allowed. Our next stop was the Red Lion, the village inn, where the innkeeper's daughter, Elsie, a girl of 17 with a quick wit, served behind the bar. Poirot, with his charm turned to full effect, coaxed her to recall the night of the murder. I saw Mr. Inglethorp, sir, she said, polishing a glass. He was by the green, near 11, walking fast toward the lane to Styles. I thought it odd he's not one for late strolls. Her certainty was a blow to Alfred's story, and Poirot's smile was triumphant. Mademoiselle Elsie, you are a jewel, he said, pressing a shilling into her hand. Back at Styles, Poirot pieced together the timeline. Alfred's alibi posting a letter at 10:15, visiting the chemist at 10:30, held until 10:40, but Elsie's sighting at 11 o'clock placed him near the estate, contradicting his claim of returning by midnight. He lied, Hastings, Poirot said, pacing the library. He was at Styles when the poison took hold, perhaps even in the house. The question is, what did he do in that hour? I suggested he might have tampered with the tonic earlier, but Poirot shook his head. The strychnine was cumulative, yes, but the final dose was that night. He ensured it was fatal. Poirot's next move was to confront Alfred, but subtly, to gauge his reaction. We found him in the drawing room, sorting Emily's papers with an air of proprietary calm. Monsieur Poirot said, his tone light, "Your devotion to Madame Inglethorp was admirable. Yet your movements on that tragic night, they puzzle me." Alfred's pen stilled, his eyes narrowing. "I've told the inspector everything," he said, his voice smooth. "I was in the village, as the clerk and chemist confirmed." Poirot smiled, a predator's smile. "We, but the innkeeper's daughter, Mademoiselle Elsa, she saw you near Styles at 11. A curious discrepancy, Nan." Alfred's composure faltered, his moustache twitching. "She's mistaken," he said, his voice rising. "It was dark, and I was nowhere near the green." Poirot pressed, mentioning the burned letter fragments, the solicitor's hint of a new will. "Did Madame suspect you, monsieur? Did she threaten your future?" Alfred stood, his face flushed. "This is preposterous. I loved my wife, would never harm her." He stormed out, leaving a trail of papers in his wake. Poirot watched him go, his eyes alight. "He is shaken, Hastings. The alibi unravels, and the ashes accuse. He knows we are close." I urged a direct accusation, but Poirot demurred. "Patience, mon ami. We have cracked the shell, but the kernel remains. There is another player, I think a shadow, behind Alfred." I puzzled over this, suggesting Cynthia's dispensary access or Lawrence's vagueness, but Poirot waved a hand. "Not Cynthia. She is a pawn, not a queen. Lawrence, perhaps, but I sense a colder hand." The afternoon brought a new clue. Poirot, revisiting the household statements, focused on Manning, the butler, who had mentioned Alfred storing the tonic in his room. Poirot requested to see Alfred's quarters, a request John granted with a grimace. The room, austere yet tidy, yielded little at first. A few books, a locked valise, a shaving kit. But under the bed, Poirot found a small vial, its label faded, but legible: strychnine, hydrochloride. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, holding it to the light. The weapon, hidden in plain sight. The vial was empty, its contents presumably used, but its presence was damning. Poirot sent the vial to Inspector Wells for analysis, requesting discretion. "If Alfred knows we have this," he said, "he may flee. We must tighten the net slowly." He theorized that Alfred had laced the tonic over days, using the laudanum to mask the taste, and administered the final dose on the fatal night, perhaps during his unaccounted hour. The locked door, Poirot suggested, was a ruse. Alfred could have entered earlier, leaving the key inside to suggest an external act. Dinner was a tense affair. Alfred's absence, noted with raised eyebrows. John, weary, spoke of selling estate land to cover debts, a prospect Mary met with a tight smile. Cynthia, struggling for normalcy, asked about my war experiences, but her voice trembled. Lawrence, sketching in a notebook, barely ate. Poirot, present at Mary's invitation, was a silent observer, his gaze dissecting each nuance. As we rose, he drew me aside. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we spring the trap. The vial, the alibi, the ashes, they converge on Alfred, but we must be certain of the accomplice. Sleep well, for the end is near." I retired, my mind a whirl of clues and questions. The alibi's collapse, the vial's discovery, the burned letters echo. They pointed to Alfred, yet Poirot's hint of another player nagged at me. Styles Court, its elegance marred by betrayal, seemed to close in, its secrets teetering on the edge of revelation. As I drifted to sleep, the church bells tolled faintly, a requiem for Emily and a harbinger of the truth Poirot would soon unveil. Chapter 8. The Hidden Player. The seventh day since Emily Inglethorpe's murder broke with a restless energy. As if Styles Court itself sensed the nearing climax of Hercule Poirot's relentless pursuit. The morning was crisp, the sky a pale blue, streaked with wisps of cloud, but within the house, the atmosphere was taut, each occupant navigating a maze of grief and suspicion. Breakfast was a perfunctory ritual, the clatter of cutlery a thin veneer over unspoken tensions. John Cavendish, his face gaunt from sleepless nights, spoke of legal matters with a distracted air. Mary, her elegance unshaken, maintained a cool silence, her eyes occasionally meeting mine with an unreadable intensity. Cynthia Murdoch, her vivacity a distant memory, stirred her tea listlessly, while Lawrence, sketching idly on a napkin, seemed to float above the fray. Alfred Inglethorpe, pale but composed, returned to the table after his absence the previous evening, his manners polished yet strained, as if he sensed the noose tightening. Hercule Poirot, joining me in the library after breakfast, was a dynamo of quiet resolve. His eyes gleamed with the fervour of a hunter closing in on his quarry. "Mon ami," he said, arranging his notes with meticulous care, "we stand at the precipice. The vial, the alibis collapse. The ashes, they point to Alfred, but there is a shadow behind him, a hidden player who aided his scheme. Today, we unmask them." I nodded, my pulse quickening, though I puzzled over this unseen accomplice. Poirot's hints of a deeper game had left me grasping, yet his confidence was a lodestar in the fog of deceit. Our first task was to follow the trail of the strychnine vial found in Alfred's room. Poirot had received a preliminary report from Inspector Wells. The vial's residue matched the strychnine in Emily's tonic, a damning link. Yet Poirot was not content with the obvious. "The vial is too convenient, Hastings," he said, pacing the library's worn rug. "A clever man, like Alfred, does not leave such evidence under his bed unless he is careless or framed. We must trace its source." He proposed a visit to the village chemist, Mr. Hargreaves, to inquire about strychnine sales, suspecting an external connection. We walked to Styles St. Mary under a strengthening sun, the village bustling with market day activity. Hargreaves, behind his counter, greeted us with a cautious nod, his hands busy with a mortar and pestle. Poirot, with his disarming charm, inquired about strychnine's availability. "It's tightly controlled, sir," Hargreaves said, wiping his brow. "Used for vermin, mostly, and only sold with a signed register." He produced the ledger, its pages a record of mundane transactions. No entry listed Alfred, but Poirot's. I caught a name, James Carter, a stranger who had purchased a small quantity of strychnine 3 weeks prior, claiming it was for a farm. Carter, Poirot murmured, noting the address a lodging house in a nearby town, a name to pursue. Back at Styles, Poirot's inquiries turned inward, focusing on the household's interactions with outsiders. He questioned Manning, the butler, about visitors in the weeks before Emily's death. Manning recalled a man, a city type, sharp-dressed, who had called on Alfred a month ago, introduced as a business associate. "Didn't catch his name, sir," Manning said, polishing a candlestick. They talked in the study, private-like. Poirot's interest sharpened. "Describe him, s'il vous plaît." Manning obliged, tall, lean, with a scar on his left cheek. He left after an hour, and Mr. Inglethorpe seemed put out. Poirot thanked him, his mind clearly racing. A scarred man, Hastings, perhaps our Monsieur Carter. Poirot's next move was to probe the household's knowledge of this visitor. He began with Lawrence, found in the conservatory, surrounded by wilting ferns. Lawrence, his poet's eyes vague, was startled by Poirot's directness. "A visitor. I don't recall," he said, his fingers smudging ink on a notebook. Poirot pressed, describing the scarred man. Lawrence hesitated, then admitted seeing Alfred with a stranger in the village a month prior. "Near the Red Lion. I thought nothing of it," he said, his voice faltering. "Alfred's always meeting people." Poirot's gaze was piercing. "And yet you did not mention this, monsieur. Why?" Lawrence flushed, mumbling about irrelevance, but Poirot's silence spoke volumes. Cynthia, next, was found in the drawing-room, mending a shawl. Her hands trembled as Poirot questioned her about Alfred's associates. "He never spoke of business to me," she said, her voice low. "But once, at the dispensary, a man came asking for him, a tall fellow, with a mark on his face. I sent him to Styles." Poirot's eyebrow rose. "And you told no one?" Cynthia's eyes filled. "I didn't think it mattered." "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, have I done wrong?" Poirot soothed her, but as we left, he confided, "She is innocent, but—" Her silence served the killer. "This man, he is the key." Poirot's theory crystallized. Alfred had an accomplice, likely this scarred stranger, who supplied the strychnine and perhaps advised on its use. Carter, or whatever his true name, is no farmer, Poirot said, pacing the library. He is a shadow moving in Alfred's orbit, perhaps a creditor or a partner in some scheme. The vial was his gift, left to incriminate Alfred if plans went awry. I suggested the accomplice might have acted alone, framing Alfred, but Poirot shook his head. "Nan, Alfred's hands are stained. The tonic, the timing, the burned letter all point to him. The accomplice merely enabled." To test this, Poirot requested Inspector Wells' assistance in tracing James Carter. A telegram to the lodging house confirmed Carter's existence, a transient who had left a week ago, destination unknown. Wells, intrigued, promised to alert neighboring constabularies, but Poirot was not content to wait. He dispatched a message to a London contact, a discreet investigator, to search for a scarred man linked to Alfred's past. "If Carter is found," Poirot said, "he will sing, and Alfred's song will end." The afternoon brought a subtler inquiry. Poirot revisited a detail from Emily's room, a cryptic note found tucked in her blotter, addressed to A and signed with a flourish. Initially dismissed as one of Lawrence's poetic scribbles, it read, "Trust not the surface, for it deceives." Poirot, re-examining it, suspected it was Emily's, a warning to herself about Alfred. He confronted Lawrence, who was in the garden, clipping roses with distracted care. "Monsieur Poirot said, producing the note, 'Is this your hand?'" Lawrence studied it, his face paling. "No, it's mother's," he admitted. "I found it in her desk days before. I thought it was nothing, just her musings." Poirot's gaze was stern. "And you kept it secret. Why?" Lawrence stammered, claiming fear of stirring trouble, but Poirot's silence was damning. "You shield someone, monsieur, or something. The truth will not wait." Poirot's suspicions now extended to Lawrence, whose evasions hinted at knowledge, if not complicity. "He is no murderer," Poirot told me, "but he knows more than he says. Perhaps he saw Alfred with Carter, or overheard their plans." I suggested Mary, her reserve a potential mask, but Poirot demurred. "Her discontent is personal, not criminal. The hidden player is not within the family, but without." Dinner was a strained affair. Alfred's presence, a lightning rod for tension. John, weary, spoke of estate taxes, his voice flat. Mary's silences were punctuated by sharp glances at Alfred, who ate with forced calm, his eyes darting. Cynthia, struggling for normalcy, asked about village news, but her hands trembled. Lawrence, sketching again, barely spoke. Poirot, invited by John, observed in silence, his gaze a silent probe. As we rose, Alfred excused himself abruptly, claiming a headache, and Poirot's eyes followed him. A hunter tracking prey. Later, in the library, Poirot shared his plan. Tomorrow, Hastings, we set the stage. The vial, the alibi, the scarred man, they converge on Alfred, but Carter is the wild card. If we find him, the game ends. If not, we force Alfred's hand. I puzzled over the note to her, suggesting it might implicate another, but Poirot was firm. It is Emily's cry against Alfred. Her suspicion crystallized. The hidden player supplied the means, but Alfred wielded the weapon. As we parted, the house settled into a restless quiet, the funeral's echo fading into the promise of revelation. I retired, my mind alight with the image of a scarred stranger, the shadow behind the murder, and Poirot's unyielding quest to drag him into the light. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The 8th day since Emily Inglethorpe's murder dawned with a deceptive serenity, the sun gilding the lawns of Styles Court while a storm of suspicion brewed within its walls. The household, frayed by grief and the relentless probe of truth, moved through the morning with a brittle civility. Breakfast was a tense ritual, the clink of porcelain a fragile counterpoint to the unspoken accusations that hung in the air. John Cavendish, his eyes hollow from the strain of managing the estate and the murder's aftermath, spoke curtly of legal consultations. Mary, her composure a polished mask, sipped her coffee with a detachment that seemed to challenge scrutiny. Cynthia Murdoch, her usual brightness extinguished, stirred her tea absently, her fingers trembling. Lawrence, lost in a slim volume of Blake, contributed nothing but a distracted murmur, while Alfred Inglethorpe, his face a study in controlled calm, offered platitudes about Emily's legacy that rang hollow. The weight of Poirot's discoveries, strychnine vial, the collapsed alibi, the scarred stranger pressed against the room, though only I knew their full measure. Hercule Poirot, joining me in the library after breakfast, was a dynamo of quiet intensity. His suit was immaculate, his moustache a gleaming banner of resolve, but his eyes burned with the fire of a man nearing his goal. Mon ami, he said, arranging his notes with the precision of a conductor, today we set the trap. Alfred is the spider, but the web is fraying. The hidden player Carter, or whatever his name remains elusive, but we shall force Alfred to betray himself. I nodded, my heart quickening, though the complexity of Poirot's plan left me grasping. The note to A, the burned letter, the vial, they were pieces of a puzzle only Poirot's mind could fully assemble. Our first task was to confirm the identity of James Carter, the scarred man Poirot suspected as Alfred's accomplice. A telegram from Poirot's London contact arrived mid-morning, its contents tantalizing but incomplete. A man matching Carter's description, known as Charles Vance, had been linked to Alfred in a failed business venture years prior, a scheme involving fraudulent investments. Vance, with a scar on his left cheek, was a known procurer of restricted substances, though no recent sightings placed him near Styles. Vance, Poirot murmured, folding the telegram. A ghost, but one. We shall summon. If Alfred fears his betrayal, he will crack. Poirot's strategy was to stage a confrontation, gathering the household to reveal his findings while subtly implicating Vance to gauge Alfred's reaction. He requested Inspector Wells' presence, ensuring official weight, and arranged for the meeting that evening in the drawing room. "We shall present the evidence," Poirot told me. "The vial, the alibi's flaws, the burned letter, but we shall hint at Vance's shadow, watching Alfred's eyes for the truth." I marvelled at his theatrical flair, but Poirot was sober. "It is not theatre, Hastings, but psychology. The guilty mind betrays itself under pressure." While awaiting Wells, Poirot pursued a final thread. The cryptic note to which he now believed was Emily's warning to herself about Alfred's duplicity. He re-examined it in the library. Its words, "Trust not the surface, for it deceives," etched in Emily's elegant script. "She knew," Poirot said, his voice soft. "She saw through his mask, and he silenced her before she could act." I suggested the note might point to another, perhaps Alfred's accomplice, but Poirot was firm. "Nan, it is Alfred. The A is no coincidence." But Vancy supplied the means, perhaps even the plan. To tighten the net, Poirot questioned Mary Cavendish, whose reserve had grown more pronounced. We found her in the conservatory, arranging lilies with a precision that bordered on obsession. Madame Poirot began, his tone gentle. "You were close to Madame Inglethorp. Did she ever speak of a man named Vance, or a stranger with a scar?" Mary's hands stilled, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of surprise. "No," she said, her voice cool. "She spoke of Alfred's business dealings, but never names." "Why do you ask?" Poirot smiled, deflecting. "A small matter, madame. And her will, did she hint at changes?" Mary's lips tightened. She mentioned fairness for John and Lawrence. But Alfred was her blind spot. Her words, though measured, carried a barb, and Poirot thanked her, his gaze lingering as she returned to her flowers. The afternoon was spent preparing the trap. Poirot briefed Inspector Wells, who arrived with a constable, his walrus moustache bristling with skepticism, but his respect for Poirot evident. The strychnine vial, now confirmed as the murder weapon's source, was to be presented, along with Elsie's testimony and the burned letter fragments. Poirot instructed Wells to watch Alfred closely, noting any sign of panic. "If he believes Vance is near," Poirot said, "he may confess to save himself." As evening fell, the household gathered in the drawing-room, its chandelier casting a soft glow over the sombre faces. John, weary but resolute, sat by the fire. Mary, in a black silk gown, was a statue of restraint. Cynthia, her eyes red, clutched a handkerchief, while Lawrence, sketching in a corner, seemed only half present. Alfred, his composure a thin veneer, adjusted his cufflinks with nervous precision. Wells and his constable stood by the door, their presence a silent threat. I took my place beside Poirot, my pulse racing as he rose to speak. "Madame et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding. "We stand in the shadow of a great crime, a murder most foul. Madame Inglethorp was poisoned, her life stolen by strychnine laced in her tonic. Tonight we unveil the truth." He recounted the evidence with theatrical precision, the forensic report detailing the strychnine's cumulative doses masked by laudanum, the vial found in Alfred's room, its residue a perfect match, the burned letter fragments hinting at a new will that threatened Alfred's inheritance. "Madame Inglethorp planned to disinherit her husband," Poirot said, his eyes locking on Alfred. "She suspected his greed, and he acted to preserve his fortune." Alfred's face paled, his hands clenching. "This is outrageous," he protested, rising. I loved Emily, would never harm her. Poirot pressed on, detailing the alibi's collapse. The post office at 10:15, the chemist at 10:30, but Elsie's sighting at 11 o'clock near Styles. You were here, monsieur, when the poison took hold. You prepared the tonic, you administered the fatal dose. Alfred's voice rose, his composure cracking. Elsie is mistaken. I was in the village until midnight. Then came the trap's masterstroke, and yet Poirot said, his tone silken, you did not act alone. A man, Charles Vance, with a scar on his cheek, supplied the strychnine. He was your partner, your shadow. Where is he now, monsieur? Will he betray you? Alfred's eyes widened, a flash of terror crossing his face before he mastered it. I know no, Vance, he said, his voice hoarse. This is a fabrication. But his hands trembled, and Wells, watching closely, leaned forward, his notebook open. Poirot pivoted, turning to Cynthia. Mademoiselle, he said, you worked at the dispensary. Did Monsieur Alfred ever request unusual substances? Cynthia, startled, shook her head. No. Well, once. He asked about sedatives, but I refused. And a manner-scarred man came. Once, looking for him. Poirot nodded, as if expecting this. You were used, mademoiselle. Your expertise exploited to procure the poison. Cynthia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. No, I didn't know. Her distress was genuine, and Poirot's gaze softened, though his focus returned to Alfred. The room was electric, each word tightening the noose. John, his face grim, stared at Alfred, while Mary's eyes narrowed, her reserve cracking. Lawrence, roused from his reverie, dropped his pencil, his gaze fixed on Poirot. Wells, sensing the moment, stepped forward. Mr. Inglethorp, he said, your alibi is in tatters, and the evidence mounts. Will you explain the vial, the letter, this Vance? Alfred, cornered, stood rigid, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. I have nothing to say, he snapped, but his voice cracked, and he sank back into his chair. Poirot, with a theatrical flourish, concluded, the trap is set, monsieur. The truth will not wait. If Vance is found, he will speak, and your fate is sealed. He bowed, signalling the end, and the household dispersed, stunned. Alfred fled to his room, Wells following to ensure he remained. John and Mary exchanged a glance, their silence heavy, while Cynthia, sobbing, was led away by Lawrence, who murmured comforts. In the library, Poirot confided his strategy. Alfred is breaking Hastings. The mention of Vance was the spark. Fear betrays his guilt. Cynthia was a pawn, her access to the dispensary exploited, but she is no murderer. I asked about Vance's role, and Poirot was grim. He is the hidden player, the supplier, perhaps the instigator. If we find him, the case is complete. If not, Alfred's confession will suffice. I marveled at the trap's precision, but Poirot was cautious. The game is not won, mon ami. Alfred may yet slip free. We watch, we wait. As night fell, Styles Court settled into an uneasy quiet, the trap's echo reverberating through its halls. I retired, my mind alight with the evening's drama, the image of Alfred's terrified eyes seared into memory. Poirot's little grey cells had set the stage, and the final act loomed, promising to unveil the full truth of the murderous shadow that had claimed Emily. Chapter 10. The Confession. The 9th day since Emily Inglethorpe's murder broke with a tense stillness. As if Styles' court held its breath in the wake of Hercule Poirot's dramatic confrontation. The sun rose pale, its light filtering through a veil of high clouds, casting the estate in a muted glow. The household, shaken by the previous evening's revelations, moved through the morning with a haunted air. Breakfast was a silent ordeal, the absence of Alfred Inglethorp a palpable void. John Cavendish, his face carved with exhaustion, murmured about contacting the solicitor to settle Emily's affairs. Mary, her elegance strained, maintained a steely composure, her eyes avoiding the empty chair at the table's head. Cynthia, Murdoch, pale and withdrawn, barely touched her food, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lawrence, as ever, seemed detached, his gaze fixed on a distant point, a pencil twirling absently in his fingers. The weight of Poirot's trap, the strychnine vial, the collapsed alibi, the spectre of Charles Vance hung over us, its echoes reverberating through the hushed dining room. Poirot, joining me in the library after breakfast, was a beacon of quiet resolve, his eyes, bright with the clarity of a man who sees the end game, betrayed no trace of doubt. Mon ami, he said, settling at the table with his notes arranged like a general's battle plan. The trap has sprung, and Alfred is caught. But the confession, we must coax it from him, or find Vance to seal his fate. I nodded, my pulse quickening at the prospect of resolution, though the shadow of the scarred accomplice loomed large. Poirot's certainty was a lifeline. Yet I sensed the final piece of the puzzle remained just out of reach. Our first task was to monitor Alfred, who had secluded himself in his room since the drawing-room showdown. Inspector Wells, stationed at Styles with a constable, reported that Alfred had made no attempt to flee, though his demeanour was agitated, his requests for privacy curt. Poirot, undeterred, requested a private interview, which Wells arranged with a grudging nod, his respect for Poirot tempered by bureaucratic caution. "He's rattled, Mr. Poirot," Wells said, adjusting his moustache. "But he's stubborn. If he's guilty, he's not cracking easily." Poirot smiled, a predator's smile. "Leave that to me, Inspector. The mind betrays what the tongue conceals." We found Alfred in his room, a stark space of polished wood and sparse furnishings, its austerity at odds with his polished exterior. He stood by the window, his back to us, his silhouette rigid against the morning light. "Monsieur Poirot began, his voice smooth but unyielding. "The evidence is overwhelming. The vial, the alibi's falsehood, the burned letter each points to you. And Charles Vance, your scarred confederator's shadow grows closer. Will you speak, or wait for him to betray you?" Alfred turned, his face ashen, his moustache drooping like a wilted flower. "I've told you, I know no Vance," he said, his voice hoarse. "You've built a fantasy, Poirot, and I'll not be bullied into it." Poirot's gaze was relentless, his words a scalpel. "A fantasy, monsieur. The strychnine in your room, the letter Emily burned to protect her new will, the testimony of Elsie placing you at Styles when you claimed to be elsewhere, these are no fantasies. And the note, trust not the surface. Emily's warning against you. She saw your greed, your betrayal." Alfred's hands clenched, his eyes darting to the door, but Wells' presence blocked escape. "You have no proof," he whispered, but his voice cracked, a fissure in his defiance. Poirot pressed, his tone softening to a dangerous purr. "Proof, monsieur. The vial was yours, hidden where only you would keep it. The tonic, laced with strychnine over days, was prepared by your hand, the laudanum, your cloak to mask it. And Vance supplied the poison, did he not? A man from your past, a partner in schemes, now turned to murder. Where is he, Alfred? Will he save you or sell you? Alfred's composure shattered, his hands rising to his face. Stop, he cried, his voice raw. I can't. He sank onto the bed, his shoulders heaving, and Poirot, with a glance at Wells, signalled for silence. The confession came in a torrent, as if a dam had burst. It was for the money, Alfred gasped, his eyes wild. Emily's fortunate was slipping away. She spoke of a new will, cutting me out, giving it to charities, to John and Lawrence. I couldn't let it happen. I met Vance in London. Months ago, he had strychnine, said it was untraceable if done right. I paid him, took the vial. I added it to her tonic, just a little each day, with the laudanum to hide it. That night, I gave her the final dose, enough to end it. I burned her letter to the solicitor she'd written to confirm the new will, I thought. No. One would know. Poirot listened, his face impassive, though his eyes burned with quiet triumph. And Vance? He asked, where is he now? Alfred shook his head, his voice a whisper. Gone. He left after the sale, said he'd disappear if I kept quiet. I don't know where. Wells, scribbling furiously, stepped forward, his voice stern. Alfred Inglethorp, you're under arrest for the murder of Emily Inglethorp. The constable handcuffed Alfred, who offered no resistance, his defiance drained, his confession a weight that crushed him. As Alfred was led away, Poirot drew me aside. The trap worked, Hastings, but Vance remains a spectre. Alfred's word confirms his role, but without him, the case is incomplete. I asked about Cynthia, whose dispensary access had been exploited. Poirot was firm. She was a tool, nothing more. Alfred used her trust, her routine, to secure the tonic. Her grief absolves her. I nodded, relieved, though the shadow of Vance gnawed at me. The household, informed of Alfred's arrest, reacted with a mix of shock and relief. John, in the drawing room, sank into a chair, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. I knew he was rotten, he said, his voice low, but Mother, she trusted him. Mary, her reserve cracking, wept softly, her hand gripping John's. Cynthia, devastated, sought Poirot's reassurance. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear. Poirot, with rare gentleness, patted her hand. You are blameless, mademoiselle. Your heart is true. Lawrence, hovering at the edges, muttered about justice, his eyes distant, as if the reality was too raw. Poirot's next task was to tie up loose ends. He met with Inspector Wells to review the evidence, ensuring Alfred's confession was corroborated by the vial, the forensic report, and the burned letter fragments. The note to a Poirot confirmed was Emily's final act of suspicion, a warning she could not voice. Wells, impressed, promised Poirot was skeptical. He is a ghost, Inspector, but Alfred's guilt is certain. The case will hold. That afternoon, Poirot and I walked the gardens, the roses now drooping under the weight of late summer. A sad affair, Hastings, he said, pausing by a fountain. Greed, betrayal, a woman's trust broken, yet the little grey cells they prevail. I asked about the locked door, a detail that still puzzled me. Poirot smiled. Simple, mon ami. Alfred entered earlier, before Emily retired, and left the key inside. The door was locked by her, not him, to create the illusion of an external act, a clever touch, but not clever enough. Dinner was a sombre affair, the household grappling with the confession's aftermath. John spoke of rebuilding, of honoring Emily's legacy. Mary, softened by the ordeal, touched his arm, a rare gesture of warmth. Cynthia, her spirit flickering, vowed to continue her work, while Lawrence, sketching again, murmured about elegy. Poirot, present at John's insistence, was a quiet observer, his work nearly done, as we parted. Poirot confided his satisfaction. The case is closed, Hastings, save for Vance. But Alfred's confession, the evidence it is enough. Justice is served. I retired, my mind heavy with the day's events, the image of Alfred's broken figure seared into memory. Styles Court, its shadows pierced by truth, seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare. The confession had ended the nightmare, but the echo of Emily's loss lingered, a reminder of the cost of human folly. Chapter 11. The final pieces, the 10th day since Emily Inglethorpe's murder, unfolded under a sky of unbroken blue. The warmth of late July softening the edges of Styles Court's sombre mood. Alfred Inglethorpe's confession had lifted a veil, yet the house bore the scars of betrayal, its elegance tempered by the weight of recent truths. The household, though relieved of suspicion's chokehold, moved with a quiet restraint, as if testing the ground beneath their feet. Breakfast was a muted affair, the dining room's grandeur a stark contrast to the subdued voices. John Cavendish, his shoulders slightly less bowed, spoke of meeting the solicitor to finalize Emily's estate, his tone resolute but weary. Mary, her reserve softened by the ordeal, offered a rare smile, her hand brushing John's in a gesture of solidarity. Cynthia Murdoch, her eyes clearer though still shadowed, managed a tentative laugh at a servant's anecdote, a sign of her resilience. Lawrence, ever the dreamer, scribbled in a notebook, his detachment a shield against the rawness of reality. The absence of Alfred, now in custody awaiting trial, was a silent presence, his chair at the table a reminder of the fracture he had caused. Hercule Poirot, joining me in the library after breakfast, was a figure of quiet satisfaction, his work nearly complete. His suit was impeccable, his mustache a gleaming testament to his unshaken poise. But his eyes held a reflective depth, as if weighing the cost of victory. "Mon ami," he said, settling at the table with a single sheet of notes. "The case is all but closed, yet the final pieces must be placed with care. Charles Vance, the scarred shadow, eludes us, but justice for Madame Inglethorpe is secure. Today, we ensure no thread remains loose." I nodded, my mind still reeling from Alfred's confession, though the spectre of Vance nagged at me, a ghost uncaught in Poirot's meticulous net. Our first task was to pursue the elusive Vance, whose role as Alfred's accomplice remained a tantalizing gap. Poirot had received a second telegram from his London contact, reporting a sighting of a scarred man matching Vance's description in a Bristol boarding house, though he had vanished before police could act. "A slippery eel," Poirot remarked, folding the telegram with a frown, "but his absence does not weaken our case. Alfred's confession, the vial, the burned letter, they are enough. To ensure thoroughness, Poirot drafted a description of Vance for Inspector Wells, urging a wider search, though he confided in me his skepticism. Vance is a professional, Hastings. He will not be found unless he wishes it, yet his shadow confirms Alfred's guilt. Next, Poirot turned to the legal ramifications of Emily's estate, a final piece to secure her legacy. John had arranged for the solicitor, Mr. Hargrove, to visit that afternoon, and Poirot requested to sit in, citing the burned letter's implications. We met in the drawing room, its heavy curtains drawn to admit a flood of sunlight. Hargrove, a wiry man with a pince-nez, produced Emily's original will, dated a year prior, which left the bulk of her fortune to Alfred, with modest bequests to John, Lawrence, and charities. However, he revealed a draft of the new will, sent to his office days before Emily's death, which Poirot had suspected from the burned fragments. Mrs. Inglethorp instructed me to prepare it, Hargrove said, adjusting his glasses. It increased the shares for her sons and her charitable funds, reducing Mr. Inglethorpe's portions significantly. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And was this draft known to anyone? Hargrove shook his head. Only to me, and perhaps her confidants. She was discreet, but resolute. John, listening intently, exhaled, his relief palpable. So mother meant to set things right, he said, his voice thick. Mary, at his side, squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Poirot, with a nod to Hargrove, confirmed the burned letter's fragments matched the draft's intent, sealing Alfred's motive. He knew, or suspected, Poirot said, and acted to preserve his claim before the will was signed. The meeting concluded with Hargrove's assurance that the new will, though unsigned, could guide the estate's distribution, given Alfred's conviction. John and Lawrence would inherit equitably, ensuring Styles Court's future, while Emily's charities would flourish. Cynthia, named as a minor beneficiary, blushed at the news, her loyalty to Emily rewarded. As Hargrove left, Poirot confided, "A fitting end, Hastings. Madame Inglethorpe's wishes prevail, despite her killer's schemes." Our next task was to address Cynthia's role, her unwitting involvement a lingering concern. Poirot sought her out in the conservatory, where she was tending a cluster of orchids, her movements careful but her face strained. "Mademoiselle," he began, his tone gentle, "you have suffered under suspicion, but your heart is clear. Alfred used your trust, your access to the dispensary, to secure the tonic. You are blameless." Cynthia's eyes filled, her voice trembling. "I should have seen it, Monsieur Poirot. I checked the bottles, but he was so convincing." Poirot patted her hand, his compassion genuine. "You were a pawn, not a player. Continue your work, mademoiselle, and honor Madame Inglethorpe's faith in you." Cynthia nodded, a spark of her old spirit returning, and I felt a weight lift. Her innocence affirmed. Lawrence, too, required attention, his evasions a minor but nagging thread. Poirot found him in the garden, pruning roses with a distracted air. "Monsieur Poirot," said, his voice firm, "you withheld the note to A, and your silence about Alfred's visitor." "Why?" Lawrence, startled, dropped his shears, his face flushing. I didn't want to stir trouble," he stammered. "Mother's note, I thought it was just her musings. And the man with Alfred, I barely saw him. I didn't know it mattered." Poirot's gaze was stern but not unkind. "Truth matters, monsieur, always. Your silence delayed justice, but it does not damn you." Lawrence nodded, chastened, and Poirot left him to his roses. Satisfied the poet posed no deeper threat, the afternoon brought a final meeting with Inspector Wells, who confirmed Alfred's transfer to a county jail, his trial set for the following month. The evidence confession, vile forensic report, and witness testimonies was ironclad, Wells assured us, though he regretted Vance's escape. "We'll keep looking," he said, his moustache twitching. "But Inglethorpe's done for." Poirot nodded, his expression serene. "Justice is served, Inspector. Vance is a shadow, but Alfred's light has burned out. As evening approached, the household gathered for a quiet dinner, the first without the spectre of murder looming. John, emboldened by the will's resolution, spoke of restoring Styles, his voice carrying a new strength. Mary, her warmth more evident, proposed a memorial for Emily, a gesture that drew nods. Cynthia, her spirit reviving, shared a dispensary anecdote, her laugh a tentative return to normalcy. Lawrence, sketching less, engaged with John about the estate, a sign of grounding. Poirot, present at Mary's invitation, was a silent observer, his work a quiet triumph. After dinner, Poirot and I walked the gardens, the air sweet with honeysuckle. A case of human frailty, Hastings, he said, pausing by a marble bench. Greed, trust, betrayal all laid bare by the little grey cells. I asked about Vance, the one flaw in his victory. Poirot shrugged, a rare gesture of acceptance. He is gone, mon ami, but he was the tool, not the hand. Alfred's confession closes the circle. I marvelled at his precision, the way each Clovial letter, alibied, converged, and he smiled, modest as ever. It is order, Hastings. The mind seeks it, and the truth follows. As we returned to the house, Styles Court seemed lighter, its shadows dispelled by truth. The final pieces were in place, Emily's legacy secured, her killer bound for justice. I retired, my heart eased, though the echo of Vance lingered, a faint ripple in the calm. Poirot's work was done, and the mysterious affair at Styles was drawing to its close, a testament to the power of reason over the darkest of human impulses. Chapter 12. Farewell to Styles. The 11th day since Emily Inglethorpe's murder marked a turning point for Styles Court. As if the estate, cleansed by the revelation of truth, exhaled a long-held breath. The July sun bathed the gardens in a golden haze, the roses regaining their vibrancy, their petals unfurling as if in defiance of the recent darkness. The household, though still shadowed by loss, moved with a newfound purpose, their steps lighter, their voices softer but more resolute. Breakfast was a quiet affair, yet the air held a tentative hope. John Cavendish, his face less haggard, spoke of plans to restore the estate's finances, his tone infused with a determination I hadn't heard before. Mary, her elegance now warmed by a subtle openness, engaged with him, suggesting renovations. To honour Emily's memory, Cynthia Murdoch, her auburn curls catching the light, laughed softly at a story John shared, her spirit visibly mending. Lawrence, for once without his notebook, listened attentively, his dreamy air tempered by a rare focus. The absence of Alfred Inglethorpe, now awaiting trial in a county jail, was a silent relief. The wound of his betrayal beginning to scar over Hercule Poirot, my companion in this grim odyssey, joined me after breakfast for a final walk through the gardens, his presence a quiet anchor. His suit, as ever, was impeccable, his moustache a gleaming badge of triumph, but his eyes held a reflective calm, as if savouring the resolution of a complex symphony. Mon ami, he said, his voice soft as we strolled past a bed of lavender. The affair at Styles is concluded. Justice is served, Madame Inglethorpe's wishes preserved, and the shadows dispelled. Yet every case leaves its echo, does it not? I nodded, my mind tracing the arc of our investigation, the burned letter, the strychnine vial, Alfred's confession, the elusive Charles Vance. Poirot's genius had woven these threads into a tapestry of truth, and I felt a surge of admiration. For his relentless mind, our walk took us to the fountain, its gentle splash a soothing counterpoint to our conversation. I asked Poirot to reflect on the case, curious about the intricacies that had driven him. He paused, his fingers tracing the brim of his hat. "It was a crime of the heart, Hastings," he said, his gaze distant. "Greed, yes, but also trust, betrayed. Madame Inglethorp saw Alfred's true nature too late, and he, fearing her resolve, struck with cold precision. The laudanum, the strychnine, the locked doral were tools of a calculating mind, yet they could not outwit the little grey cells." He smiled, a flicker of pride, and I marvelled at how he had unravelled the puzzle, the sediment in the tonic, the alibis, collapse through Elsie's testimony, the burned letters fragments revealing Emily's intent to disinherit Alfred. I pressed him on Charles Vance, the scarred accomplice who remained a ghost. Poirot's expression grew sombre. "Vance is the shadow that escapes us," he admitted. "A professional who supplied the means, but left Alfred to wield the weapon. His absence does not weaken the Alfred's confession, the vial. The evidence are sufficient, but it reminds us that justice is not always complete." He shrugged, a rare gesture of acceptance. "We have done what we can, Hastings. The courts will handle Alfred, and Vance, perhaps, will face his reckoning elsewhere." We spoke of the household, their futures now reshaped by Emily's restored will. John and Lawrence, freed from financial strain, could preserve Styles Court, their inheritance a testament to their mother's love. Mary, softened by the ordeal, seemed poised to rebuild her bond with John, their shared grief a bridge to reconciliation. Cynthia, absolved of any complicity, would continue her work at the dispensary, her loyalty to Emily a guiding star. And Lawrence, Poirot added, a twinkle in his eye, may yet write a poem worthy of this drama, though his secrecy delayed us. I laughed, the first true lightness I'd felt in days, and Poirot joined me, his chuckle a rare gift. As we neared the house, Poirot paused by a marble bench, his gaze sweeping the estate. "Styles is a microcosm, mon ami," he said. "Love, greed, loyalty, deceit play their parts, as in life. The detective's task is to impose order, to find the pattern in the chaos." I asked if he ever tired of such puzzles, and he shook his head, his moustache quivering with conviction. "Never, Hastings. The human heart is a labyrinth, but to navigate it, to bring light to its shadows, that is my calling." The afternoon brought farewells. John, Mary, and Cynthia gathered in the drawing-room to thank Poirot, their gratitude tempered by the weight of loss. John clasped his hand, his voice gruff. "You've saved us, Poirot, in more ways than one." Mary, her eyes bright, added, "Emily would have been grateful." Cynthia, tearful, embraced him, whispering, "You believed in me." Lawrence, lingering at the edges, offered a nod, his words few but sincere. "You saw what we couldn't." Poirot, ever modest, deflected their praise. It was logic, mise, Amos, and the pursuit of truth. Honour Madame Inglethorp by living. Well, I, too, prepared to leave, my convalescence complete, my spirit bolstered by the resolution of the case. As I packed, Poirot joined me in my room, his presence a final anchor. "You return to London, Hastings?" he asked, leaning against the door frame. I nodded, mentioning a medical board to clear my return to duty. "And you, Poirot, back to your cottage?" He smiled, enigmatic. "For now, mon ami. But the world is full of mysteries, and I suspect we shall meet again in their pursuit." His words, laced with promise, sent a thrill through me, the prospect. of future adventures, a spark in the fading light of Styles. We parted at the station, Poirot's small figure diminishing as the train pulled away. Styles' court faded into the distance, its red brick and ivy a memory etched in my mind. The mysterious affair was closed, its secrets laid bare by Poirot's relentless logic. Yet, as the countryside rolled past, I felt the echo of Emily's loss, the shadow of Vance's escape, and the enduring brilliance of Poirot's mind. The war awaited me, but Styles had restored my faith in justice, in order, in the power of truth, to pierce the darkest of human follies. I leaned back, the rhythm of the train a lullaby, and let the memory of Styles carry me toward whatever lay ahead.